Okay. Why why can why can babies learn their first spoken language with what appears to be relative ease? But I mean, who knows? We're not a baby, you can't really tell. Yet an adult can't or has a much what appears to be a much more difficult time learning a second spoken language. Huge question, no answer, but I would like to take a stab at it. I think about this question a lot because it's related to my field. I teach spoken English at a high school in Japan. That's where I am. As you can tell, these are incredibly Japanese. So that discrepancy, what's up with that? Why, right? What's going on with a baby that's not going on with an adult? The adult was once a baby, right? So, what I think, what I think about a lot, I'm just going to regurgitate everything that I think about. I see it as a difference in how we think as babies versus how we think as adults. Adults, we have a world that we have compartmentalized our perspective within our brain, and then therefore how we look at it. Everything has its little place, right? Everyone has their role, and our language too. We view language as separate words, and in this case, written words. And there's an entire culture around the written word, while there's an entire culture around the spoken word. And so we think in these compartments, and we try to connect all these different compartments, all these different separated, isolated instances, words, experiences. We try to connect it in a way that makes sense to us. So we start from I guess the bottom. We start inductively. We think inductively, I guess. We experience, and then we try to connect all our different experiences into something that makes sense. So, while babies think deductively, so the opposite. Babies think from the top. Because that's how that's how they see the world, that's how the world is introduced to them. They don't have enough experience to be able to have anything compartmentalized in their brain, and therefore the perspective of the world. And they're introduced, so in terms of language, they're introduced to not words, how we view them, but they're introduced to a chunk of sound, an incomprehensible chunk of sound. So, in a sense, it's one really long word, and that represents whatever caused the sound to happen. So, if the baby for some reason felt hungry, and it cried due to this hunger, it sees its mother, but this, from the baby's perspective, is probably just this giant lumbering creature. It sees it come, and it just emits the sound from its mouth. It's one giant long word. And that word represents an answer to the hunger. If the baby then receives food, if the word is not followed up with food, then that word that has nothing to do with an answer to this hunger. So that's how the baby sees the world. It's just one giant long string of sound that represents various things. Sometimes, is she going to give me, am I no longer going to be hungry? Is this pang of hunger going to be satisfied from this sound or not? So in order to tackle that, in order to tackle this in order to take this giant chunk of sound and turn it into language as we see it as adults, the only type of thinking is inductive, because that's what inductive thinking is about. Deductive thinking is about. Deductive thinking is when you take a general thing, you can't get more general than a giant chunk of sound that represents something, in this case, whatever occurred after that, hunger being satiated or not, represents that, and then you break it down into its useful parts. Why does this chunk of sound mean this, while this chunk of sound, a different chunk of sound, means that? Why are some parts of this chunk of sound similar to another different meaning chunk of sound, and why some parts are different? To understand that, you must accept the entire thing first. Exist with the entire thing. Babies have no choice but to do that because they don't have enough experience. They don't have enough experience in their life to bring any alternate perspectives, realities, or opinions. They don't have it, so they can't not accept blah as here. It's still pretty abstract, but if you just think as a baby, it makes sense. So, due to the inability to think inductively like an adult does, and only have deductive thinking, for many reasons, the brain hasn't developed, hasn't focused its neuronal power. Like babies start out with tons of many more neurons than adults do, right? And eventually they start cutting the fat, I guess you could say. Start cutting off neurons that are not being used, right? So it starts with the ability to just understand anything, but then once it starts realizing, the brain realizing that there's so many, that these are the only sounds that it's hearing, it starts cutting the fat, or in other words, neurons that aren't being used. And once it starts doing that, then it starts thinking more inductively because it has experience. It's like, oh, I've never heard this sound before. The reason why I can say that is because I have heard other sounds enough that my brain just automatically recognizes them. While adults are already there. Adults are already thinking inductively. And so they're trying to piece together these written words, which is like the ultimate, the most condensed, the most divided and well mapped out form of language. They're trying to piece all these together in a way that makes sense when they're learning a new language that has a different set of written word.